Welcome to the Persuasive Mindset, your podcast guide to mastering the art of persuasion by exploring its role across diverse fields through in-depth conversations with experts. I am your host, Dr. Serena Mate de Londra. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Ms. Beatriz Sanchez, a pioneering figure in global finance whose career spans more than 4 decades. She's held senior roles positions at prestigious banks such as HSBC, Goldman Sachs, and most recently, she served as Chair of the Americas and Executive Board member at Bank Julius Baer. Today, she continues to lead as a board member, investor, philanthropist, and advocate for women's advancement in business. In this episode, Ms. Sanchez reflects on her remarkable journey from being the only woman in the room in the 1980s to becoming one of the most respected leaders in international banking. As well, we discuss how the industry has evolved, the importance of mentorship versus advocacy, how to define your personal brand, and what it takes to thrive in a field that's constantly being reshaped by technology, regulation, and purpose. A central theme in our conversation is the role of persuasion in leadership. She also shares powerful advice for students and early career professionals on building meaningful purpose-driven careers within the field of finance. We explore her belief that banking is a platform for economic and social impact and why young people should see it as a path not just to success, but to shaping the future. If you're passionate about leadership, inclusion, or how finance can be a force for good, this episode is for you. Now, let's dive into our conversation with Ms. Beatriz Sanchez. Enjoy! As we start our conversation, I'd like to ask, what drew you to the financial services industry, and was it something you always aspired towards?
I started my career in the early 80s in New York City. I had never intended to be in the financial services industry. I actually thought I was going to be a doctor. And it was through just confronting what I really enjoyed and didn't enjoy doing that I realized that studying medicine and carrying forward with that commitment was something that my parents wanted me to do, but not necessarily me. And through different contacts and through different things that life brings you, I was exposed to banking. And that's where I decided that I wanted to focus.
Over the course of your 4-decade-long career within the field of finance, what are some of the most significant changes that you have witnessed within the industry?
After graduate school, I went up to New York City because I was raised in Miami. And I never imagined that I would end up 44 years later here in Zurich after having a career with, I think, some of the most amazing financial institutions, including HSBC, Goldman Sachs, and my last one, Julius Baer, and end my career after being a member of the executive board of the second largest bank in Switzerland. So it was an amazing journey, one that I enjoyed tremendously, where I worked with so many brilliant individuals and where I also saw so many changes over these last 40 years. So many changes in technology, in how the industry has become so much more globalized and so much more expansive geographically, how regulation has molded and shaped behavior, strategy, and focus, how compliance and AML has really led to tremendous changes as to how we do business across the world, and also how fiduciary responsibility became so much more important. All of that really, I think, has been very welcome.
In your opinion, what has changed the most for women and for diversity more broadly within the industry since you began working in it?
I believe that there is so much more diversity in the workforce in financial centers today. I remember when I started in the early 80s, I used to be the only woman in the room. And that was uncomfortable. And the lack of female role models was a challenge. I think today, even though we are not where we should be, clearly, we do have much more role models. We do have much more diversity. And I'm not just speaking about gender diversity, that's important, but diversity of race, diversity of perspectives, of culture. And I think that also adds to a richness in the industry that wasn't there 40 years ago.
Has the purpose of the financial industry changed over time? And if so, how does that shift impact the kind of talent that the sector attracts today?
We are much more purpose driven today than we were when I started my career. Social responsibility is very important, and it's not just a tick the box exercise. If we in the financial services industry want to be an employer of choice, if we want to attract young people with passions, with vision, with a sense of commitment to society, to their communities, to themselves, and to the planet, we need to do this. This is not just a good thing, but a business sense thing to do. So much more purpose, much more social responsibility, and much more philanthropy as part of the activities that we carry out. So I think overall it's been a fantastic ride. And I think the industry today is much more interesting, much more diverse, much more complex. But for someone coming in and looking at it to understand whether it's a good fit, I think much more exciting.
And what do you believe makes a career in banking meaningful and also impactful?
As I mentioned, I have been in love with my career and my choice for the last 40 some years. And I think banks provide very important catalysts and therefore career paths. Banks provide financial security. They provide economic stability. They promote economic growth because banks promote credit to both individuals and corporations, allowing them to invest in either purchasing or creating businesses and therefore more jobs and economic growth. They also play a key role in implementing monetary policy across the world by controlling the flow of money and obviously aiding the economy as a result. They also help community development. A lot of banks today are community banks or are very engaged in their communities. They facilitate savings, they facilitate investments, they advise individuals on investments, whether you're just starting out with a small savings account or whether you are a multimillionaire with a family office. So it runs the entire gamut. And banks provide liquidity to the system. They provide reliable payment systems and they allow markets to function correctly. Just remember back in 2008 when there was this financial crisis and where banks were frozen out of being able to provide these services. The economies across the world suffered as a result. So it's really, I believe, a center of economic power, of economic growth, but also of development and of promoting opportunities for individuals.
Much of your career has focused on private wealth management, and I'm curious to know what makes that area so compelling to you.
I dedicated myself most of my career to private wealth. And I always found that very exciting because you're dealing with a decision maker. You're dealing with that individual or that family group that created the wealth, that created the legacy, that made a difference. Because, yes, some wealth is inherited, but you need to create it before you can inherit it. And through private wealth, you deal with very interesting people, very global individuals that have needs. And the way that you can service them really runs the gamut of 180 degrees. It can run from servicing their corporate needs, their financing needs, their liquidity needs, by then advising them on how to sell their company, what to do with the liquidity once the sale is done, how to manage risk versus reward, how to look at family governance, family succession, how to bring in the next generation into the picture, how to provide succession advice, tax advice, how to help them with their legacy. And this is something where a lot of the female clients or the female members of families really are first movers in that. Men tend to prefer how to preserve and grow capital. Women tend to look at it as what legacy do we want to leave this wealth and this luck that we've had. And so the philanthropy approach and how to deal with looking at philanthropy, setting up foundations and measuring projects, all of that, and then bringing in that second or third generation into a sense of responsibility and education is really exciting. And I think this is why wealth management is so interesting because you can do investments, you can do advice, you can do lending, you can do corporate advice as well. It's as complex or as simple as that family or that client that you have in front of you, and your capabilities to take that through confidence and through persuasive dialogue, which we'll get into later. So, overall, a very exciting place to be in.
Thinking particularly of students or recent graduates who are considering a career in banking, what kind of roles should they be looking at beyond the traditional image of a banker?
I think sometimes one has a certain vision that is quite narrow of what it means to be in a bank. But yes, obviously, you have bankers, you have individuals that do credit and lending or research, advising, trading, etc. But there's so many other career paths in a bank that may not necessarily be obvious. Banks today are basically technology hubs. We need technology to grow, to service our markets, our clients, to stay competitive. So, to IT, anyone interested in technology and artificial intelligence, in software, in programming, is absolutely necessary for banks today. We're looking at, as we look at geographic expansion as well, different language skills, different cultural skills are also very, very important in any of the different areas. We also have careers in foundations. Banks have foundations. Julius Baer, for instance, has a foundation that is celebrating this year 60 years of operation. It's one of the longest living foundations, corporate foundations in Switzerland. And so, if you're interested in impact, if you're interested in that type of activity, that is a role. And I know other banks have those type of foundations as well. Human resources, coaching, education. In banking, you're continuously being educated, being updated. So if you like that aspect, if you're a teacher, a teacher of financial services, teacher of financial empowerment, education, HR, wellness, so much today needs to be empathetic and including the employee and having a venue for an employee to feel that if they're under a lot of pressure or if they're under burnout, they have a place, a voice, and an ambiance that can address that. As I mentioned earlier, research, financial analysis. And I mean, if you like kitchens and chefs, a lot of banks have kitchens and restaurants. And so I don't want to be a superfluous or glib, but I'm saying be challenged and be curious is my message, because there's so many new and interesting roles today in banks. And it's really worth a look, and it's really worth, okay, what are my skills? What do I really enjoy doing? And how can I position that within a financial organization that will be relevant going forward to economic growth and to really supporting financial markets and therefore individuals in the future.
I noticed that you have worked at prestigious institutions such as HSBC, Goldman Sachs, and most recently with Julius Baer Bank. What advice would you give about choosing the right organization to work for?
One thing to look at when you are looking at what does it make sense? I mean, for me was, I spent many years at HSBC. I spent many years at Goldman Sachs, and then my last 7 years at Julius Baer. And the culture of these organizations are so different. Each one has cultural aspects that maybe touch you or talk to you much more than maybe others. So when you are looking at what type of organization do I really want to be a part of? Do I want to contribute to? It has to be a good fit for both sides, for the organization, but also for the employee. So look at culture. What is the culture of this organization? Do I fit in? What is their purpose? What are their priorities? How do they deal with human communications? How is that diversity and inclusion? How many women are there in senior management? How open is communication? I think all of those questions are important because you're going to spend a lot of time in a corporate world. Finance and banking is not a 9 to 5 job if you really want a career. And so make sure that you're going to want to be there for many hours because life is always a trade-off. And so make sure that trade-off brings you benefits.
Earlier in a conversation, you've spoken about the importance of persuasion in leadership, and I'd like to ask, what does a persuasive mindset mean to you, and how has it shaped your own career?
So, Sorina, I know that you are very, very much a sponsor of and convinced of the persuasive mindset. And that's the name of your podcast, and why I think I was so attracted to it in the first place after I studied you and what you're hoping to achieve, which I think is fantastic with this platform. And I think one of the reasons we've connected is because I do believe a persuasive mindset is absolutely necessary for success, but success in everything we do, success as people, as mothers, as fathers, as employees, as just as human beings. Persuasion needs to be a part of everything, because that is how we convince, that is how we motivate, that is how we grow, and that is how we get others to join us in our path. So I think if I look at my role as a leader during all of these years, I don't think I could have achieved what I've achieved without persuasion as a mindset, to quote you. But I think really for persuasion to be successful, you need three critical things. You need credibility, you need emotional connection with the people that you're trying to persuade, but also with the message that you want to get across. And you also need a logical reasoning. It needs to make sense. You need to know your audience, and you need to be able to explain what is in it for you. If you believe that what I am saying, my vision, my mission, my ideas resonate, what is in it for you? So I think all of that is very important, but persuasion is absolutely necessary. And what I want to get across here too, it's not just a leader, it's not just that person in the top that needs to be persuasive. I think in every step of a career path, you need to hone in those skills, because that is how you influence, that is how you inspire action, that is how you shape openness, that is how you shape your career as well. Persuasion needs to happen at every level, not just as the top. But now, speaking from my perspective as the top, I think it really does inspire, and it leads to many positive things. It leads to conflict resolution, because if you can persuade a team to effectively collaborate, to be motivated together, obviously, whatever small conflicts that could arise because people are all different and think differently, it tends to really lower that pressure and lead to tremendous energy going in the same direction. I think it also provides stakeholder support, and it provides organizational credibility. And that as well is needed at every level, because we all have stakeholders that we need to include and we need to keep attentive and supportive. It also promotes, I think, new ideas and innovation. If I can persuade you that this makes sense because of X, Y, Z, and you believe it, and you persuade someone else, and all of a sudden, we are agents of change, which is also an important role for persuasion. And I believe that having that persuasive mindset transforms someone from just a manager to really a transformational leader. And I think today that is so important, because a manager for me is not a leader. A manager is someone who ticks the boxes, who makes sure the lights are on, the lights are off, and people are doing what they're doing. But in today's complex world, in the need to inspire, in the need to motivate, in this fast-paced, challenged environment that we are operating in, we need to be much more. We need to be transformative. And I think it's only through persuasion, but being transparent as to why, being credible as to why, being respectful and empathetic, I think that's absolutely key to success.
What are some of the key responsibilities and also challenges that one faces when they are a member of an executive board, such as Julius Baer Bank? And how does one balance strategic oversight with also staying connected to the operational side of the business?
Let me just give you maybe an idea, being on the executive board of Julius Baer. And I think the first thing is there is no such thing as a typical day, because challenges, opportunities, clients, situations, decisions, they come when they come, and you need to face it and you need to deal with it. So there is really no typical day. But I think As a member of the executive board of a very large financial institution, you basically have so many responsibilities. Obviously, you have the responsibility for the region or for the business that you are responsible for. And therefore, you need to assure that the strategic focus, that the tactical execution of certain things, that your employees, that your clients, that the needs that you need to address, that the products, the services, the talent that you need to be available are there. And I always saw my role in that sense as not being a micromanager, but really empowering those individuals that I had under me that were experts in their own regions or countries or fields. And I saw my role as really paving that road to be so smooth that the cars that they needed to drive down that road would drive safely, fast, and efficiently. So it's more about coaching than it is about managing or getting in the weeds. And empowerment is very important because you can't do it all. So it's really focusing on clients, focusing on my people, but it's also being part of an organization where you need to be a role model, where you need to join in decision making that supports strategy. Do we want to go into this market or not? How do we deal with this new competitive situation? How do we deal with risk mitigation? How do we assure that we are meeting budget? How do we control costs? There's a whole plethora of things that one needs to address when one is in a senior role, especially on the executive board of an organization, because you're responsible for the management and the well-being of this organization. But I also believe it's just much more than just the day-to-day business and the strategic focus. It's also, I think I alluded to it as well, how can you inspire others? How can you be a role model? And how can you take on more from a corporate perspective than just your remit? And that's why I've always believed in being involved in things that I was passionate about and contributing in other ways. Why I felt very honored to be on the board of the Julius Baer Foundation for 5 years, why I was very honored to be part of the art committee and join in the selection of and the growth and support of our art collection. And I think that way you also give back, but you also enrich yourself so much as an individual when you also look at the non-financial, the more esoteric, or the more purpose-driven outside of just creating the bottom line and creating a strong financial organization. You do it through many, many ways. And I think it's important always to be able to be a well-rounded person and to share that in the day to day and to be accessible at all times. I think that's also important because it's only by walking the floors, it's only by talking to people that you really understand how people feel, what the needs are. And you need a reality check because as senior leaders and as executive board members, sometimes we tend to be a little bit in the ivory tower, and it's very important to be sometimes where the trenches are. So you get to understand the challenges that our colleagues have as they start their career, as they're developing markets, as they're dealing with clients, as they're creating products, etc. So you can again facilitate that drive of that car by making sure that road is paved as smoothly and as well as possible and that there are no potholes.
Throughout your career, you have also worked with the Julius Baer Foundation. Could you please share with us what is the mission of the Julius Baer Foundation and also what kind of impact does it have on the ground?
Julius Baer Foundation has as its purpose to minimize wealth inequality. And wealth inequality has many levers. It's the lever of educational opportunity or lack of opportunity. It's the lever of environmental impact. It's the lever of communities. It's the lever of innovation. There's so many different ways that you can tackle wealth inequality. And many times we forget that in order to have sustainable change, you need to educate, you need to give economic opportunity, but you also need to make sure the communities in which you are providing these type of aid or services feels that they have a long-term gain. So what we at Julius Baer Foundation try to do is we look for projects, especially in whether it's Africa, Latin America, Asia, India, that really try to address some of those levers and try to impact as many people as possible. So just to give you a few ideas as to some of the projects that we have worked on. Close to my heart, obviously, some of the projects in Latin America. I'll describe two. One is called Favela, and we have been supporting a fantastic group of young individuals, especially originally two founders that came from a favela in Belo Horizonte. They, through just, I think, striving and their family values and their own values, they both went to Europe to get a secondary and a tertiary education. So they graduated from university, one, I think, out of Lisbon and one out of the Netherlands. They were friends, they were a couple, and then they decided after they graduated to go to Africa, I think Mozambique, if I remember correctly, and try to start doing some work there in community service. And then they realized, why are we in Mozambique when we have those same issues in Brazil? So they went back to Belo Horizonte and they set up this NGO, this organization called Favela, where they work with marginalized individuals in one of the largest favelas in Belo Horizonte to try to educate them, to try to give them economic empowerment, and therefore create economic growth, create employment, and be able to service the community. Where the foundation, where Julius Baer Foundation came in some 5 years ago, we supported them with a digital education project. So young people between the ages, let's say, of 17 and 35, we supported this group to teach them about the internet, using digital software, being able to grow their business, make their businesses more effective through using the internet to gain clients, to be able to purchase, to hire, to manage your P&L, to really organize yourself. And we thought that was very interesting because through this, you basically have an exponential impact. And just in these years, I think directly 750 individuals have been educated or have had this type of service, but indirectly, we have changed the lives of 3,000 people. And through this, just to give you an example, because I went with the chairman of Julius Baer a couple of years ago to Belo Horizonte to visit, and wonderful woman and her partner who were basically selling some food stuff and had a small little canteen in one of the areas of the favela. Today, do catering service for the larger community of Belo Horizonte. And from basically employing two people, they now have seven or eight, and they have created economic opportunity and economic betterment for themselves, for more employees, but also for the families that they work with. So examples like this, I feel, are so important because you're really supporting people from the grassroots up, and especially women. I'm a big believer that when you support women and when you help women realize their dreams and help them thrive, the community thrives as well.
Could you share with us another project from the Julius Baer Foundation that illustrates again the power of grassroots impact?
I want to highlight a project that we did in conjunction with an NGO called Fundes in Colombia, in Cartagena. And they have a philosophy of trying to build communities and economic opportunities so eventually these communities can be self-sustaining and can create businesses that are self-sustaining. So what they have done and what we have supported with through the foundation is taking cartoneros, they're called. So basically garbage collectors in the areas of Cartagena, training them how to look at collecting recyclables and then setting up an operation where they can sell those recyclable wastes by weight. And then on the other side, bringing in organizations or bringing in companies that operate in that area, like Pepsi Cola and others, to be able to purchase that. So all of a sudden, you create an economic value. You work, you collect, you measure, you get paid because there is a market for that. And we've also worked with the local restaurants and the local businesses that have plastic and that have other things that can be recyclable in order for them to start putting them in certain containers so these individuals can go and collect them much easier than in a trash dump and therefore have much more resources to deal with. And as a result of this, we have also built a community around these individuals where today they have insurance, they have social benefits, they have an opportunity to save, they have an opportunity to take their children to school. We're supporting the building of community centers where they can go and they can relate and therefore create a functioning community that feels that they have a backstop and a social safety net that they didn't before because they were just picking garbage off the streets. And so I think things like that really add value. And this is part of what I say a purpose-led organization enriches so much and is so important when you want to look at where do I want to spend my time.
And how does the Julius Baer Foundation relate to the rest of the bank's philanthropic or community efforts?
So it's separate because the foundation needs to be an independent entity, right? And we do not want the foundation to really have a conflict of interest with the bank. The foundation has its own chapter, its own purpose, and it's there to really minimize wealth inequality through the different levers and many more that I've mentioned. We have community service and something called Julius Baer Gives within the organization, within the bank, where employees can, whether you are in Hong Kong, whether you're in Berlin, whether you're in Zurich, etc., you can do community service. And many times we have, for instance, when there was a hurricane or a tragedy, or some of the earthquakes that we've seen, or some of the natural disasters that we've seen recently, we will then collect as employees, as a bank, through Julius Baer Gives to give to institutions that we feel will be directly involved with supporting that. So it's more tactical, whereas the foundation is more long-term strategic. And even though we are very proud to be part of the Julius Baer family, we are independent.
This is fascinating, and I'd like to stay a little bit more with the work that Julius Baer Bank does beyond traditional banking, and particularly to look at the areas of community impact and also cultural engagement. I've heard, for example, that the bank has an impressive art collection, and I'd want to ask, could you please share more with us about that, and why does it matter that the bank has an art collection?
Back in 1981, Hans Baer, one of the Baer family members, who was an avid art collector, donated a large part of the family's collection to the bank with the message and the instructions to promote Swiss art. And what we have done through the years is promote young Swiss artists and promote the ecosystem of art in Switzerland. And what we like to do is we like to find artists early stage of their careers, follow them, understand what's unique about them, what is different, what adds more value, and then be able to support them, not just initially, but through the different phases of their career as they evolve, as they develop, and hopefully as they become successful artists. Of course, there's a risk involved in that because not every young artist has that promise or has the promise, but maybe not necessarily the path. But we really do believe that art and Swiss art needs to be supported because art is such an important part of what we are as a society. It is really, I believe, the voice of the soul of a society. And we have so many amazing young artists here in this country. I like to cover my walls with some of them as well. I'm passionate about it. And if you're interested, follow the Julius Baer Art Collection on Instagram. You will get a really good sense of the type of quality of pieces that we have, which are over 5,000 today. And we believe that art should be part of our daily experience, our daily dialogue. And so you will find the Julius Baer collection in our hallways, in our offices, but also in our client rooms across all our offices around the globe.
As we come towards the end of our conversation, I'd like to bring our focus back to career development. For younger professionals or students who are curious about this industry, it might be helpful to hear how did you first get started within the finance industry and what kind of role gave you the initial entry point?
My first job was as a credit analyst, and I went through a credit trading program, which was sort of the internships that you did at that time. It was credit. So I learned all about balance sheets and P&Ls and how to analyze cash flows and what makes a company a strong one or not a good credit risk, etc. And so that was my job. And it was slave labor. You basically started at around 7 in the morning and you went home at around 11 o'clock at night. And next day, you were expected to be fresh and clear and energized to continue to analyze balance sheets. So, not necessarily exciting and fun, but I think a great way to understand, to learn, to make connections. And then from there, I graduated to being a credit analyst in the leasing company of a bank, which now has been bought and bought many times over in the consolidation of the financial industry over the last 40 years. But it was a bank called Manufacturers Hanover Trust, and they had one of the largest leasing companies. And so after sort of the training and being a credit analyst, I graduated into being a credit analyst within the project financing group of Manufacturers Hanover Leasing, where I had to analyze the business sense of, at that point in time, it was providers of oil rig equipments to Pemex in Mexico. So I became an expert on oil rigs and on the cash flow of selling services in deep sea drilling and shallow drilling to the national oil company because the clients of the banks were these independent contractors, etc. Because they would lease, we would buy and lease back these equipments to them under contract, etc. So I got to know the oil industry. And I got my very first business trip was to Mexico, to the oil patch. I was probably about 23 and a half years old, and I felt like a fish out of water. It was a very interesting experience. But I think in life, everything that you learn and that challenges you makes you grow. And so, therefore, it's a good experience to have.
Thank you very much for sharing this fun personal story. And as we conclude, I'd like to ask my final question. What advice would you give to someone who's inspired by your career journey and also hopes to follow a similar career path within the finance industry?
I would advise understanding who you are, and who you are will change with time. But today, the person that you are, what are you passionate about? What do you like? What really motivates you? And you may not have it all down, but you know yourself at this point enough to know this I like, this I don't like, this I'm not sure, but I'm willing to try. So come from a place of self-awareness. Come also from an understanding that you don't know everything. As a matter of fact, you know very little. And so listen, ask, learn, be a risk taker. Understand that opportunities come when you take calculated risks and when you put yourself out there. As I mentioned earlier, understand the culture of the company that you are interviewing with. Make sure that culture is one that you can live with, that you can enjoy, and that enriches you, and that you also are fit for that culture. Talk to people, network. That is so important. Networking is absolutely key because sometimes it's who you know. Look for advocates and look for mentors. They're not the same thing. A mentor is someone that is going to give you advice, that is going to guide you, that is going to be able to brainstorm with you on your doubts, your questions, your insecurities, etc. An advocate is someone who is going to know someone who knows someone who's going to tell them what you know, and that is going to promote you into a position or a job or an opportunity. And realize that you are your own little company, you are your brand. And so define that brand. Be your marketing department, be your accounting department, be your purchasing department, but also make sure to have a board of directors that at each stage of your career will bring you different skill sets, will bring you different advice. And it doesn't have to be 10 people, it could be one, it could be two, and it'll change as your career develops. But network, ask for advice, listen, take risks, and enjoy. Because life without enjoyment, without laughter, without fulfillment is really a shame.
And that concludes our inspiring conversation for today. If you enjoyed this discussion, please be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with others who might benefit from it. Until next time, be well!